Before we begin today's presentation, here is a brief and unrelated word. Quite apart from today's subject, there is also a separate book series titled Psyop Christianity, written by Ron Allen Curtis Ratzlaff, under the pen name The Awakened Hybrid. It is its own, entirely different investigation. That work stands on its own. Across 7 volumes, it examines historical anomalies in the origins of Christianity and makes the evidence-driven case that the faith was shaped deliberately by the Roman Empire. If that separate subject interests you, the complete series is available now on Amazon. Simply search Psyop Christianity or scan the code on screen. Now, let us begin. Episode 2. From Ararat to Avalon. A chronological reconstruction of Syro-Anatolian presence in prehistoric and ancient Britain through multi-proxy analysis. Part 2. The Iron Age transformation, circa 1200 to 500 BCE. Section 2.1. The Late Bronze Age collapse and its aftermath. The collapse of the Late Bronze Age palace economies during the 12th century BCE represents one of the most dramatic transformations in the history of the Eastern Mediterranean. Within a period of approximately 50 years, the major states of the region, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean palace centers, the Canaanite city-states, experienced catastrophic destruction and abandonment. The causes of this collapse remain debated, with proposals including climate change, seismic activity, internal social upheaval, and the depredations of the mysterious sea peoples mentioned in Egyptian and Ugaritic texts. The impact of this collapse on the population structures of the Eastern Mediterranean was profound. The destruction of the Hittite Empire created a power vacuum in Anatolia that was eventually filled by the Phrygian and Lydian kingdoms, while the decline of Mycenaean civilization initiated a period of population movement and cultural transformation in the Aegean that culminated in the emergence of classical Greek civilization. In the Levant, the collapse of Egyptian imperial control and the decline of the Canaanite city-states created conditions for the emergence of new political formations, including the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, the Aramean states of Syria, and the Phoenician city-states of the Lebanese coast. The genetic evidence for population movements during this period has been illuminated by recent ancient DNA studies. The analysis of genomes from the Philistine city of Ashkelon demonstrated a significant influx of European-derived ancestry during the early Iron Age, consistent with the migration of populations from the Aegean or southern Europe to the southern Levant. This European ancestry component subsequently declined over time as the immigrant population intermarried with the local Levantine population. The demonstration of significant population movement during this period provides a model for understanding other, less well-documented migrations connecting the Eastern Mediterranean with more distant regions. Section 2.2. The emergence of the Urartian kingdom. The re-emergence of the Hurrian-speaking population of the Armenian highlands as the kingdom of Urartu during the 9th century BCE represents a critical development in the political geography of the Near East. The Urartian kingdom, with its capital at Tushpa on the shores of Lake Van, developed into a major imperial power that contested control of the Armenian highlands and the upper Euphrates with the Neo-Assyrian Empire for over 2 centuries. The Urartian state was characterized by sophisticated administrative organization, monumental architecture, and advanced metallurgical technology. Urartian royal inscriptions, written in a cuneiform script adapted from Assyrian models, document the construction of fortresses, irrigation systems, and temples across the kingdom's territory. The distinctive Urartian material culture, including polished red pottery, bronze weaponry and armor, and elaborate metalwork decorated with mythological scenes, has been recovered from sites across eastern Anatolia, Armenia, and northwestern Iran. The linguistic evidence for Urartian provides crucial information about the relationship between the Urartian kingdom and the earlier Hurrian populations of the region. Urartian is demonstrably related to Hurrian, sharing core vocabulary, grammatical structures, and morphological features that indicate descent from a common ancestor. The relationship between Hurrian and Urartian is analogous to that between Latin and the Romance languages, with Urartian representing a later, geographically restricted descendant of the more widely distributed Hurrian language of the 2nd millennium BCE. The religious and ideological traditions of Urartu show clear continuity with Hurrian antecedents. The Urartian pantheon, documented in lengthy inscriptions at rock sanctuaries, was headed by the god Haldi, a deity of Hurrian origin who was elevated to supreme status during the Urartian period. The persistence of Hurrian divine names and mythological motifs in Urartian religion demonstrates the continuity of religious tradition across the Late Bronze Age collapse, despite the political and demographic transformations of the intervening period. Section 2.3. The Phoenician Maritime Expansion. The Phoenician maritime expansion during the early 1st millennium BCE represents one of the most consequential developments in the history of Mediterranean connectivity. The Phoenician city-states of the Lebanese coast, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad, developed a commercial empire that extended across the Mediterranean, establishing trading posts and colonies from Cyprus to the Atlantic coast of Iberia and North Africa. The foundation of Carthage, traditionally dated to 814 BCE, marked the establishment of a Phoenician presence in the Western Mediterranean that would endure for centuries and eventually develop into an independent imperial power. The motivations for Phoenician expansion were primarily economic. The Phoenician cities lacked the agricultural hinterland to support large populations and were dependent on maritime trade for their prosperity. The demand for metals, particularly silver from Iberia, tin from the Atlantic coasts, and copper from Cyprus, drove Phoenician exploration and colonization into increasingly distant waters. The Phoenician trading network eventually extended beyond the Strait of Gibraltar to the Atlantic coasts of Iberia and North Africa, establishing contact with the indigenous populations of these regions and creating the infrastructure for long-distance exchange. The archaeological evidence for Phoenician presence in the Western Mediterranean is extensive. Phoenician pottery, metalwork, and architectural remains have been recovered from sites across the Mediterranean basin, from the Levantine coast to the Atlantic shores of Portugal. The distinctive Phoenician red slip pottery, characterized by its polished red surface and standardized forms, provides a reliable marker for Phoenician commercial activity that can be traced across the entire Mediterranean region. The question of Phoenician contact with the British Isles has been the subject of extensive scholarly debate. The classical sources provide ambiguous testimony on this point. The Greek geographer Strabo mentions that the Phoenicians traded with the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, which have traditionally been identified with the British Isles or with islands off the coast of Iberia. The Roman author Pliny the Elder attributes the discovery of the Cassiterides to the Phoenicians, though his account is confused and may refer to multiple locations. The absence of unambiguous Phoenician archaeological material from Britain has led most scholars to conclude that if Phoenician contact occurred, it was indirect, mediated through Iberian or Gaulish intermediaries. Section 2.4. The Neo-Assyrian Empire and Population Deportations. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, which dominated the Near East from the 9th through the 7th centuries BCE, developed a distinctive administrative practice with profound implications for population movements across the region. The Assyrian policy of mass deportation, the systematic relocation of conquered populations from their homelands to distant regions of the empire, was designed to break local resistance, exploit specialized labor, and populate underdeveloped regions. The scale of these deportations was unprecedented, with Assyrian royal inscriptions claiming the relocation of hundreds of thousands of individuals over the course of the imperial period. The deportation of populations from the Syro-Phoenician region is extensively documented in Assyrian royal inscriptions and administrative texts. The annals of Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Sennacherib record the deportation of populations from the kingdoms of Israel, Damascus, Hamath, and the Phoenician cities to distant regions of the empire, including Upper Mesopotamia, the Zagros Mountains, and the cities of the Medes. The famous account of Sargon II's deportation of inhabitants of Samaria provides a specific example of the scale and organization of these population transfers. The destinations of deported Syro-Phoenician populations included regions of the Assyrian Empire that were themselves sources of strategic resources. The deportation of populations to the region of the Habor River in Upper Mesopotamia, to the cities of the Medes in the Zagros Mountains, and to the Assyrian heartland itself, created diaspora communities that maintained elements of their original cultural identity while integrating into the Assyrian administrative system. The presence of individuals bearing West Semitic names in cuneiform documents from these regions attests to the persistence of these diaspora communities over multiple generations. The implications of the Assyrian deportation policy for understanding population movements connecting the Near East with more distant regions have not been fully explored. The Assyrian Empire maintained diplomatic and commercial relations with regions far beyond its borders, including the kingdoms of Anatolia, the Iranian plateau, and possibly the Caucasus. The movement of deported populations within the Assyrian administrative system created the potential for subsequent dispersal through these broader networks. As individuals and groups moved beyond the frontiers of the empire through trade, military service, or further migration. Section 2.5. The Syro-Phoenician diaspora and its reach. The combination of Phoenician maritime expansion and Assyrian population deportations created a Syro-Phoenician diaspora that extended across the Mediterranean world and deep into the interior of Western Asia. This diaspora was not a unified or coordinated movement, but rather the cumulative result of multiple processes operating over several centuries: commercial colonization, military service, forced relocation, and voluntary migration. The result was the establishment of Syro-Phoenician communities in regions as distant as the Atlantic coast of Iberia, the North African littoral, the islands of the Western Mediterranean, and the highlands of the Zagros and Armenian regions. The cultural and institutional legacy of this diaspora is visible in multiple domains. The spread of the Phoenician alphabet, which was adopted and adapted by Greek, Etruscan, and ultimately Roman and Celtic populations, represents one of the most consequential cultural transmissions in world history. The dissemination of Syro-Phoenician religious cults, including the worship of deities such as Melkart, Astarte, and Eshmun, created networks of shared religious practice that facilitated commercial and political cooperation across the Mediterranean. The transmission of technological knowledge, particularly in metallurgy, shipbuilding, and agricultural techniques, contributed to economic development in regions that had previously been peripheral to the major centers of civilization. The question of Syro-Phoenician presence in the British Isles must be understood within this broader context of diaspora formation. The absence of unambiguous Phoenician archaeological material from Britain does not necessarily indicate the absence of contact, given the nature of Phoenician trade, which often involved the exchange of perishable goods and the transmission of intangible cultural elements, rather than the establishment of permanent settlements. The evidence for Syro-Phoenician influence in Britain must be evaluated in terms of its cumulative weight rather than the presence or absence of any single diagnostic artifact. Stay tuned for episode 3. This presentation was produced by CreatiqueMedia, a veteran-owned digital studio. We build production-grade progressive web apps and custom software. Our own trivia platform, Muse Ion Trivia, shows exactly what we can deliver for your business. We also offer fully built business websites and ready-to-launch templates, from done-for-you sites to affordable starter designs. We also create marketing commercials using localized on-premise AI, giving small businesses broadcast quality ads for a fraction of the cost of a full marketing team. And because everything runs on our own hardware, your project never touches a remote data center. Your data stays private. Visit CreatiqueMedia.com to start your project today. That concludes episode 2. Stay tuned for episode 3, where our investigation continues. We will see you there.